Hi everyone, we're going to get started in 1 minute. Thank you for joining me. Hope you are doing well and having a nice Thursday so far. So thank you again. Okay, we're going to get started in 1 minute here. Happy Thursday. Welcome to part 2 of 4-part series about Psalms you should know. So just a quick review. Last week we discussed the 2 significant Psalms that we find at funerals and during the mourning process. And just on a personal note, we talked about how we have to start to understand and delve into these Psalms not only when we're at a funeral itself, but around those times and other times. And unfortunately, my stepmother passed away on this past Sunday, Michko Nickerson. And my dad and my sister are on the East Coast. And so it's been one of these experiences where, again, because unfortunately I lost my grandfather a few months ago, this time where during the pandemic and when we can't physically be with the people we care about and we can't mourn and we can't celebrate people's lives in the way that we used to pre-pandemic, I have to admit I tried to practice what I preached last week and went back to those 2 Psalms and reviewed them a little for my own process, and it really did help me. It did give me some strength and some optimism and help me move again back into the space of positive memories and the things that I'm holding on to from my relationship with her and the memories that we shared as a family. So the goal with these Psalms is that if you start to learn them and know them, that they can help in a variety of situations. So with that, we're moving on to another significant moment in our tradition, which is Shabbat. And specifically today, we're going to focus on Kabbalat Shabbat and the multitude of Psalms that comes with the Kabbalat Shabbat service. So because there are so many of them, unlike last week where we were able to delve word by word and piece by piece into those 2 Psalms, today our focus is going to be, we're still going to read through all the Psalms, but we're going to stop after every few, and I would love to hear your input instead of waiting until the end to collect all of that, your commentary and your thoughts. But it's going to be a little bit less of the word-by-word approach to each of these Psalms, just because there are more to get through. So again, as with all of these Zoom webinars, you have at the bottom there a chat function, a raise your hand function, a Q&A. So lots of ways for you to engage in this conversation, even though at this point it's one way and you can see me and I can't see you. But then when we get to that Q&A, we'll be able to talk to each other. All right, so we begin with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. So you should have seen on the chat the link to these Psalms. I'm going to be sharing them on my screen as well, but if you want to go to that link and be able to also then download that PDF, so you have these Psalms, you can add it to the collection of the 23rd Psalm and Psalm 121 from last week, and then you can add these to the Psalms you should know. And ideally, at some point, you'll be able to just, go off, oh, Psalm 23, yes. Okay, so with that, let's move in. For those who maybe came a little later, Hannah on the back end, maybe she can repost onto the chat the link to the source sheet, so you can see that again. So with that, I will also be sharing my screen, and then we'll delve into the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat. So Kabbalat Shabbat, when the mystics put this together in Sfat, in the north of Israel, not only did they have Lecha Dodi, that beautiful poem by Shlomo Alkabetz, but they really infused the majority of the Kabbalat Shabbat experience is these Psalms. And the beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat begins with 6 Psalms that represent the 6 days of creation that lead up to Shabbat itself. And so as we go through these, I'll highlight a few basic themes, but I want you to be thinking, well, how does this correspond with this idea of moving from the creation of the world from nothing to what ultimately is Shabbat on the seventh day, and what are the feelings that it evokes for you, and why do you think the mystics chose these psalms particularly to help move us into the space of Shabbat? Okay, so with that, of course, keep your ideas flowing so that we can share them. And I always love your interpretation, so I expect that again today. So we begin with Psalm 95. That's the first one. And now, L'chuna Ranana, there are a lot of these we may, especially in a Reform setting, you may not hear the entire psalm. In a more traditional synagogue, you might, but a lot of these psalms you've heard either pieces from the beginning of the psalm or pieces from the end of the psalm. So I'll try and remember as we go through these the lines that may stand out to you where you may have heard them on a regular basis. But again, when we only hear a piece of it, it takes some of the context away, right? And so I really want us to delve into seeing the entire psalm. And our thoughts about that. So really, Psalm 95 is the start of our pilgrimage towards Shabbat. That's kind of how I see it, and kind of has a feeling of that vibe as we look at the psalm itself. So, come, let's sing to God. Let's make a truah sound before the rock of our deliverance. Let's walk thankfully into God's presence with singing, with truah sounds meant just for you. A great God is Adonai, the great ruler over all of those whom we permit to rule over us. The earth's remotest sites, the crags of the highest mountains, all belong to you. The roiling ocean is your quiet pond. You designed it. Your hand sculpted the dry land's vast expanse. So come, let's bow down and bend our knees, singing praise before Adonai who made us, for you are our God. We are the people who graze in your pasture, the flock who know your guiding hand. If you would only hearken to God's voice today. Do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, the waters of strife, when you stormed at Moses to strike the rock, nor that day at Massah, the testing place in the wilderness, when all you could think of was your thirst. How your ancestors tried me, tested me, though they had seen my work. For 40 years I loathed that generation. I called them people of a wandering heart, for they did not know my paths. And so in anger I took an oath. They shall not enter the land where my rest is to be found. Okay, so really quickly, and as I said, there are a lot of these, so we're going to just do some overarching themes, but I want you to point out, if you were listening, also there are some allusions to even some of the themes and imagery from Psalm 23 and Psalm 121. We have mountains, we have pastures, we have, again, as we'll find with many of these psalms, a significant link to the natural world. Now, of course, if this is supposed to remind us of the creation of the world and the first day of creation, right, there's the majesty of the crags of the highest mountains all belong to you, and the roiling ocean, and this idea that creation is starting. But it also really begins with this idea of singing. The first thing that we're supposed to enter Shabbat thinking about is how can we enter with joy, with song, right? Truah, this is a link, of course, to the shofar at high holidays, a sound of awakening our souls, right? If no matter how we've been kind of slumbering through the week, now is the time to kind of snap out of that, to bring our joy, to sing, to use our voices in a new way, in a way that is slightly different than the way we may have used them throughout the week, right? And let's walk thankfully into God's presence with thinking, with truah. This is, again, about an entrance. This is the beginning of a slow move or a pilgrimage into Shabbat, right? So there's these elements of, okay, you can't just immediately get into a Shabbat frame of mind. And of course, Kabbalat Shabbat itself is supposed to be the guiding service that leads us into Shabbat. But even within that framework of Kabbalat Shabbat, we have the first psalm, Psalm 95, that's kind of just awakening the idea of going on this pilgrimage. Whom we then, where it's a great ruler over all those whom we permit to rule over us. What I think about is, so what have been the things that have ruled over us during the week, right? Our responsibilities to our job, to our family, the things that have taken center stage, where now we don't necessarily need to be ruled over those things, right? Similar to as Heschel talks about a Sabbath as a palace in time, right? 6 days we work and we create, and now on the seventh day we We just relish in what God has created for us all around us. So, right, we're moving away from the things that have ruled over us into a different space where we start to see the majesty of the world around us in a different way. And then just to point out towards the bottom here, do not harden your hearts. Of course, we're in the part of the Exodus story right now where we talk about Pharaoh hardening Pharaoh's heart, God hardening Pharaoh's heart. But there are a couple of references that we find at the end of this psalm to two instances as we're wandering through the desert, mostly in the book of Numbers we find these, where we have the first reference is to when Moses strikes the rock, which is the key moment in the book of Numbers, which determines his fate of never being able to enter the land of Israel. That's the first reference. And the second reference of this Massah is this idea of, again, as the Jews constantly do through our wandering in the desert, a moment of complaint about being thirsty, right? And so we have the shift in the second part of the psalm that moves away from talking about God as an external force to now we're in God's perspective. And the second half of the psalm is from God's point of view, where God is saying, don't do what your ancestors did. Don't fall into the same traps. And in this case, if we take the context of Shabbat, don't fall into the traps of what happens during the week and what you've become, or how the world may have hardened your heart during the week. And if we think about the last few weeks in our country, many of our hearts were hardened, and I'd say yesterday was a nice shift away from that, right? President Biden's message of unity, of moving away from divisiveness into a place of unification for our country, right? Don't fall into those traps of thirsting for the things you don't have in your life or hardening your heart about the challenges and the divisiveness that you find in the world. Don't fall into that trap. You are now moving into Shabbat, where you're supposed to leave those perspectives behind you and enter a new space. So I think that's another really interesting thing that we find. And then at the very end, we have where my rest is to be found, right? A menuchati, my rest, right? A menucha, a time of rest, which of course is a pretty clear, direct link to this idea of Shabbat as a day of rest. Okay, so those are just a few things from Psalm 95. We're going to do one or two more, then we'll break for your interpretations about the first few Psalms, and then we'll keep going with them. Okay, so feel free, of course, to keep adding your thoughts into the chat or wherever else. Okay, we're moving on now to Psalm 96, which is to represent day 2. So we're getting, again, further into, slowly but surely, into the Shabbat mentality. And here, this psalm seems to focus a lot more on particularism, the idea that God is the one. There's one God that we need to be focused on worshiping, right? Somewhat challenging maybe for a modern contemporary view of the world where we're not so dedicated to thinking about we are just focusing on our prayer to God. But at the core, this is about being committed to a tradition, the way I see it, right? And committed to our tradition. If we're moving into Shabbat, how do you slowly use Shabbat as an opportunity in whatever way you want to celebrate it, to feel as though you are slightly more connected to our tradition, right? And more connected to the theology and the particularism that comes with being a part of the Jewish people. So again, singing, again, a new song. Sing all earth, as though song itself were new. Sing to Adonai, praise the name, spread the good news from day to day of God's deliverance. Tell God's glory stories to all the nations, God's wonder tales to all the peoples. Adonai is great, to be praised and praised, more to be revered than anything we allow to rule us. What the nations allow to rule them are empty clods, mere godlets, but Adonai made the heavens. In faces full of honor and glory, we see the face of God. In nature's strength and beauty, we see God's holy palace. Salute Adonai. O families of the people, salute Adonai for glory and power. Salute Adonai for the glory of the name. Carry in gifts. Enter God's courts. Bow low to Adonai. Holy radiance will surround you. Whirl about before God all the earth. Spread the word among the nations. Adonai rules. And so the planets in place, it will not be swayed. God judges peoples fairly. All sides will be weighed. Make us simcha in heaven. Let the earth rejoice. Let the sea squall and all sea life sing. Let the golden fields celebrate, the trees in the forest all rustle with song. Before God, Adonai is coming to judge the earth, to test the earth for justice. All the peoples will be faithfully weighed. Right? This idea, again, one God, a focus very much on we need to be spreading the word. Right? Jews, we're not so into proselytizing, even though Rabbi Joel of blessed memory at Valley Beth Shalom used to preach that we should be more of a proselytizing people, not in the same way the Christians are, but that, and I agree with this idea, that there is deep wisdom and passion and joy and love and opportunity that comes with Judaism. And we need to spread that. And this psalm, as we're entering into Shabbat, we are supposed to sing out. We are supposed to celebrate what Judaism brings into the world, and also what our God and our Torah and our tradition has brought to the world, how its view of everything that happens is something very special that we should be shouting out to the rooftops. So that is a major theme that we have in this one. We have also, if we want to think about this idea of it being linked to day 2, on day 2 of creation, we have this idea that God separates the firmament and the skies from the waters below. So we have a little link here to this idea of the earth versus the sea life, and again, water metaphors and the images of water come about a lot in these psalms. And then this is the first instance that we will find, though there are many that we're going to find throughout Kabbalat Shabbat, of this idea of justice, right? But tzedek, the role of justice that God plays in bringing justice to earth, to the world, and that we are a part of that. That part of moving into Shabbat is not necessarily resting on our laurels from our responsibilities. It's actually to delve deeper into the real core of what it means to be Jewish and what it means to try and bring all the beauty of the world to our lives and to others. And that justice and this pursuit of justice is something significant on that journey. And so the psalm ends with this recognition of that. Okay, so let's take a break. We've done 2 of them. Let's see if there are any thoughts, questions, comments about either of these two psalms. And we have plenty more, but I wanted to just give it an opportunity in case anyone has any thoughts at this point. Let me make sure I can see if anyone is raising their hands. No. Okay, let's keep going then. All right, we're moving on to now the 3rd psalm, Psalm 97, representing day 3. If you think about this one is more the last line is something that you would find. I'll just go down there. Or Zaruach, La Tzadik, Uli Shrei Lev Simcha. Lots of different versions of this, but the end of the psalm tends to be the piece that is focused on it in services. But again, let's read through the whole thing. Psalm 97. Adonai is sovereign, let the earth rejoice, let a myriad of isles delight. Cloud and thunderhead surround the Holy One. Justice and judgment are the foundation of the throne. Fire walks on ahead, engulfing every enemy in flame. God's lightnings lit the world. The earth looked and whirled. The mountains melted like wax before Adonai, before Adon, the superior one of all the earth. The heavens have told tales of God's justice, and all the peoples have seen the glory of the Eternal. All who serve idols shall be shamed. They glorify themselves with godlets. Bow down to the one, you gods. Zion heard and hailed. The daughters of Judah rejoiced because of your judgments, Adonai. For you are Adonai on high, high above all the earth. You are raised very high above all the gods. Lovers of God hate evil. God guards the lives of the covenanted, delivering them from the hand of the wicked. Light is sown for the just, delight for the upright of heart. Delight in Adonai, O doers of justice. Give thanks to the presence of the holiness of God. Okay, so we have, again, as we found in the last one, references to this idea of justice and the role of justice, again, tzedek, in these psalms. We have here what we'll have a frame, Adonai Malach, what we'll see between Psalm 97 and 99 and 98. I'm getting that wrong, whatever. 97, in between these two Psalms, the other one, oh, sorry, it was 96 and 97, 98, 99. 96, which we just read, began with this idea of song. 97 is this idea of God is sovereign. And what's going to happen again with 98, it goes back to this, starts with this idea of song. And then 99 goes back to the beginning again with this idea of Adonai is sovereign. So there's even a little pattern here of this idea of the centrality of God and singing and shouting out the joy of God. These are linked in these Psalms. Starting with 96, there's a little pattern. 96 and 98 are about song, begin with song. 97 and 99 are going to begin with this idea of Adonai is sovereign, right? God reigns. God reigns supreme, as we find here with this idea of the flaming and the power, right? This is now getting to a little bit more of the power that God brings, right? The mountains melted like wax. Again, also kind of a link to this idea of creation and how the world may have been created, in a more poetic idea of how the world was literally shaped during creation itself. And then again, that line towards the end that is so well known: light is sown for the just, delight for the upright of the heart. That here, of course, we're supposed to, as we're lighting those Shabbat candles, it's not just the physical light that we're bringing in on Shabbat. We are supposed to, of course, also now be bringing in a spiritual light. And that when we can really encapsulate and capture the spiritual light within us, then we can help bring even more justice into the world and delight for the upright. So I saw that Penina has a question or a comment, so we'll just turn to you, Penina. Yes, what did you want to share?
There we go. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going back to the beginning. In English, they are talking about Moses, and Moses in the Hebrew isn't mentioned. So I
You're
think,
right. They're just making, again, for those who may not have even been at last session, this is a English translation from Rabbi Richard Levy, and in that specific part where it talks about Meribah and Massah, he added a little bit of context into his translation so that people would be aware.
It changes the picture because this way they put it, whoever wrote the song, which we think it's King David, put the responsibility on the people themselves, that they should take the responsibility of the wrongdoing that was happening in the desert on their own. Yeah, it's not Moses, it's them. Okay, this is one thing. Second, regarding to the word tzedek that shows up a lot. If David wrote it, even if it would later on Solomon, maybe some people say has some stuff there. I think it's really important to concentrate on the word tzedek, because the transition from autocracy to the monarchy was a big thing for the people, that Samuel warned them that it's not going to be the same. And I think the author of these beautiful phrases is telling the people that even though he is the king, and the king has the right to do all this judgment, he gives all the credit to God. And he believes that God will show the right hand, or justice for all. And they shouldn't be worried about him not following and recognize the force of God as far as justice and creation. That's all.
Great. Thank you. Tada. Thanks, Penina. Merle. Hi, Merle.
Okay, so this reminds me, the part about music, about singing and justice and unhardening our hearts, reminds me of growing up between temple, camp, youth group, and then later on as an adult being youth group advisor, etc. That the music and thinking and the music and trying to do whatever social justice we could between all those elements unharden our hearts because we were doing the right thing. And that whatever disturbed us during the week, the music and the thought of what we could do for others took away from whatever aggravated us or upset us, etc., during the week.
Thank you.
I don't.
Oh. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's until now. Am I there? Yeah.
Yep.
Until now, hearing it presented this way, even when I'm at services, whether they're in person or, virtual, I never thought of it before that way. But now I know why, or I know what it should do.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad we're able to facilitate that for you. And I think it's a really good point that the singing and the camaraderie, right? All those experiences that you mentioned are things about when we gather together as people in a community and we sing and we're joyous and we're reminded, it can remind us about what really matters and the power that we have as a collective in order to bring more justice, or at least even to let go, right? It can be really hard right now in our own isolated bubbles to just sit and watch services and to try and connect with those things. It can be a little harder. And I think especially now when we're isolated, if we can start to look at these Psalms, and now you will have them for every Friday night, and you can kind of explore even beyond the little piece that may be sung, how can you try and have them elevate you? Talia. Hi, Talia.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just keep thinking about when people do, like, singing is a kind of an art form, right? It's a meditation, and it's like a way to force a pause, so I mean, I may be speaking the obvious, but that whole idea of reflection and I don't know, I guess it's if you just keep doing, even if you're always of service to others, if you never take that break for Shabbat, then, you'll implode or explode or something. I mean, it doesn't seem like a healthy route. So it's almost like singing is a forced meditate, not a force, but a way to meditate, or a group meditation, just to be reflective. I don't know if that's even too obvious or but that's my whole thing, is because whenever there's song, my whole body just goes into it lets go of everything I thought I knew and allows for new ideas and other people's presence to be seen and heard.
Wonderful. I think even some of the most obvious things, it's always good to be reminded of some of those things that are obvious, because sometimes we forget some of the things that are most obvious. So I think it's a really great reminder of the meditative power of song. And we're going to find very soon, as we've already gotten a little taste of not only our voices, but also instrumentation and the role that plays in creating a meditative space, and also transforming from the week where we're not surrounded by song. We're not all walking around singing during the week. It would be nice if we all were, but here as a collective, we are almost forced as a community into song, because when you're gathered together, it kind of can be all encompassing. Claudia, and then we're going to move on to some more of the Psalms so we can make sure we get through some of them. So, hi, Claudia.
Hi, I have a quick question. It's more for context, and I'm sorry, maybe you covered it last week. I wasn't here. These are clearly the poems, right? There's a poetic metric to this. And I assume, were they used in temple liturgy accompanied by music? And is there any evidence at all that any of them were written by King David?
Good questions. They are poems. Some of them were supposedly offered at the temple with musicians. Some even as references we'll see even on Shabbat. So, the Reform movement, and now many conservative synagogues also fall into that category of using music on Shabbat. And there is no direct evidence that King David wrote any of these. The references usually are literally attributed to him, sometimes in the beginning of a psalm itself, as we found last week, that it says a psalm for David or a psalm by David, but there's no proof of that. And so there's still a lot unknown about the authorship of these psalms. And so a more traditional view takes it literally that these were written by King David, but we're not really sure at the end of the day. Good questions. Okay, so let's keep going, and then we'll break again after another few for more comments and questions. Okay, we're now moving on to Psalm 98. As I mentioned, Psalm 96 and Psalm 98 both begin with this idea of song. Shir Ladonai, Shir Chadash. This is another famous beginning that you find with when you go to services. Here, a psalm, sing a new song to God, Adonai, who has done wonders. The triumph of God's right hand, the bared forearm of the holy will. Adonai has made deliverance known, revealed divine justice in the eyes of the nations. God has made covenantal love and faithfulness present for the house of Israel. Each of the ends of the earth has seen the deliverance of our God. Sound teruah for Adonai, all the earth. Shout out, sing aloud, burst into song. Tune your lyre to sing for God, your lyre, then your lyric voice, your trumpets, then your sonorous shofar. Sound teruah before majestic Adonai. Let the sea roar, the waves resound. Let the world and everything alive ring out. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the hills harmonize, hill with hill, as they escort Adonai who has come to judge the earth. Let God judge this world by justice and the peoples by their upright deeds. Okay, so Talia was just talking about this meditative force of song, and here we have, and Claudia was asked, were these sung with even instruments at the temple? And here we have, now we're moving further and deeper into what it means to find expression of oneself and one's expression of one's connection to God in spirituality. And our tradition says, the way I see it, we started with some song in the very beginning, and now we're building on just our voices to adding other elements that can really accentuate the power of music and the power of song. And we do so by adding instrumentation, right? And so even the references here to the lyre, to the trumpets, to the shofar, we're building a case with these psalms into a crescendo, so to speak, that's going to be coming as we move further into Kabbalat Shabbat, and then finally, ultimately, into the Shabbat experience itself. That this is part of this pilgrimage to a different state of mind, in that if you only are going to sing, you may be still kept into your weekday frame of mind because maybe you do sing a little during the week. But now, once you start to add instrumentation and you start to shout out and bring out your connection to your spirituality in a more robust way, then we're able to kind of continue to leave the week behind and get further and further into a Shabbat frame of mind. So we have this idea, again, of justice. We've now seen this over and over again. So it's something that, it's not just tikkun olam, where we find in the word tikkun olam that stands out in our tradition as the place where we talk about justice. It's not just in Deuteronomy where it says tzedek tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. Kabbalat Shabbat every single week, one of the main themes, along with singing, that we find at the core of the Kabbalat Shabbat experience is, let's get back in touch with what it means to find and live out justice. And again, we have this covenantal love, this idea of a brit, this idea of a relationship that we continuously work on between ourselves and God, or at least between ourselves and a concept of a spiritual being or something bigger than ourselves. That Shabbat is a time for us to meditate on that and to be thinking about that. And the Psalms are trying to help us on that journey. And they're doing it in a way that's supposed to really invigorate us. It's meditative in the sense of it's an invigorating meditation, right? If you go to some Kabbalat Shabbat services, there is dancing, there is stomping on the ground, there's getting into kind of a meditative state of intensity that really is addicting. If anyone ever, especially if you want to go to Jerusalem on a Friday night to some of these minyanim, it's really powerful and beautiful. So those are just a few themes from Psalm 98. And then we finally get to Psalm 99, which is the last in the series from 95 to 99 that's supposed to represent the 6 days of creation. It's not the end of Kabbalat Shabbat. We still have a few more, but it's the end of this one little set. And Psalm 99, again, we go back, Adonai Malach, we're going back again to this idea of Adonai as sovereign as we found in Psalm 97, right? That pattern 96 and 98 were about singing, and now we have 97 and 99 about God's reign. And here we're arriving kind of towards the end of the pilgrimage of these 6 days of creation. So, Adonai is sovereign, let the peoples quake. Before the one enthroned on winged creatures, let the earth tremble. Adonai is grand in Zion, high above all the peoples. Let them praise your name, so grand and awesome, so holy. O mighty monarch, loving justice, you defined uprightness. You wrought judgment and justice in Jacob. Raise high, Adonai our God, bow low before God's earthly power, the footstool of the divine, so holy. Moses and Aaron are among the priests, Samuel among those who call out God's name, calling out to Adonai, who answers them, speaking to them in a pillar of cloud. They kept God's testimonies, and you gave them a law. Adonai our God, you answered them. A forgiving God were you to them, an avenging God when they transgressed. Raise high, Adonai our God, bow low before the mountain where God's holiness appears. So holy is Adonai our God. Okay, so we have the end of this pilgrimage of Psalm 95 to Psalm 99. We're aware here, let the peoples quake, that this is kind of more about the power that God brings, right? It's almost as though God's power can make us shake and quiver. That there's a sense, I think, here where we're supposed to be start to be aware of the limitations of our own power vis-a-vis God. And that now, as we're entering Shabbat, where we're supposed to start to move away from remembering our own power and thinking about our power in the world and what we're responsible for, these kinds of things, we're supposed to now shift a little bit away from that and take some of the burden off ourselves and be reminded that there is a power much greater than us, that there is a world and that it is working in a way that we don't have control over. But that's not supposed to upset us. That's supposed to actually comfort us as we move into Shabbat. We also have a little bit of a parallel structure that we have in verse 5, and then we have again in verse 9. If you look at verse 5, this is kind of like cut this poem in half here. This is the end of part 1. And this is the end of part 2. The end of part 1, we have this idea of bowing low. Raise high, Adonai, and bow low. And again, raise high, Adonai, and bow low. Right? So again, we're raising God up, and we are supposed to humble ourselves in the presence of God. Right? That we are supposed to be humble when we're thinking about this world and the power that we have within it, because there's something much greater than us. So can we bring humility into our lives? And I think this psalm particularly is supposed to remind us of the role and importance of humility. It's not just humility for those who are leaders, but it's a humility of our place in the world. And I think this psalm is reminding us of that. So with that, we'll pause again, see if there are some hands up, and I see there are a few before we move on to some of the other psalms. So Sukasa, hi.
You know what, in these Psalms, they all seem to be about praising God and his power and so forth, and he's either kind or he's punishes. I don't hear anything about gratitude mentioned explicitly for what he did, that he brought light to the earth, that he created the animals. I mean, I don't find them that as uplifting as I would as if we were thankful for all the things we have in our life that God created.
Okay, so you're missing the gratitude piece. You think that if we had more gratitude worked into this, then that would stick with you more.
Yes.
Okay, great. That's a perfectly acceptable critique of these psalms. So right, thank you, Claudia.
I think it's from before. I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Okay, with that, well then let's continue on. So now that we've gone through Psalm 95 through 99, we have one more psalm before Lachadodi, right? We're not going to go over Lachadodi because it's not a psalm, but there is a psalm that comes right before that traditionally, Psalm 29. So we're going to look at that. So we've covered the 6 days of creation. Now we're moving slightly into a different style of psalm, and as Claudia, I think, asked, are these attributed to King David? This one literally says at the beginning, a Psalm of David. And so let's look at that. And again, try and keep in mind, what is the purpose of this movement, right? As Sukasa mentioned, what she feels is missing so far in the Kabbalat Shabbat experience from her critiques of these Psalms is that it's really about the power and glory of God, but what about the gratitude for what we have in the world? So with that, let's go to Psalm 29 and see what that adds to our Kabbalat Shabbat experience, okay? So again, Psalm 29, a Psalm of David. So this one's Mizmor LeDavid, Havu Ladonai Ben Elim. This is another one that's traditionally chanted from the beginning. A Psalm of David. Present to Adonai, O godlike beings, present to Adonai, resplendence and strength. Present to Adonai, the resplendence due God's name. Bow down to Adonai in the beauty of a holy place. The voice of Adonai over the billows, the resplendent God has bellowed. Adonai above the crashing billows. The voice of Adonai in strength. The voice of Adonai in splendor. The voice of Adonai shattering cedars. Adonai is shattering the cedars of the Lebanon, making them dance like a spindly calf, shaking the Lebanon, all her forests, turning Sirion, all of Mount Hermon, into a wild, young, skipping ox. The voice of Adonai carving leaping sheets of flame. The voice of Adonai tossing up the sands of the desert, the entire Kadesh desert whirling in the air. The voice of Adonai startling the deer, whirling them about, stripping bare the forest, while in the palace all the populace proclaims resplendence. Adonai sat as monarch of the flood. Adonai shall sit as monarch for all time. Adonai is giving strength to the people. Adonai is blessing the people with peace. Okay, so here, this idea over and over again, what we find in Psalm 29 is this idea of the voice of Adonai, Kol Adonai. Kol meaning voice, right? What does it mean that we constantly are supposed to hear the voice of God, right? If we can't literally hear the voice of God, what I think, and again, if we link back to this idea of song or of shouting out, or basically if we think about it in another way, what is your voice? And Shabbat is a time to revisit your voice in the world, what matters to you. How do you articulate what matters to you? How do you use your voice during the week? Did you use your voice appropriately during the week? Did you fall short of that? And here, a reference to God's voice, which of course we can't hear God's voice directly. However, what this psalm does is say there are a lot of ways in which we can feel God's presence and hear God on a regular basis, right? In strength, in splendor. Now, I don't think it means that God's voice is strong. I think it means that you can potentially access pieces of God and a connection to something bigger than yourself in moments of strength, in moments of splendor. When you feel the shattering of the cedars, both maybe physically, when you hear the crashing of a tree, you recognize the power of that tree falling down, but also the other moments of actually maybe that sadness when you are feeling shattered, when you are feeling crushed. In those moments, as we found in Psalm 23 and 121 last week, in those moments where we are mourning, when we are in pain, maybe that we can look for God's voice in those places as well, because there is a power that we find in God's voice, in a connection to God that actually can even, as it says right down here, turning these things into wild young skipping oxes. I imagine a young, skipping ox. This powerful creature skipping around, being young again, right? Shabbat is this time for us to be revitalized, for us to reconnect with the deep energy within ourselves. And this psalm seems to be trying to allude to that. We also have at the very end here, Adonai oz le'amo yitain Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. This is found in the Torah service, right? So not only do we say it here on Friday night, but we have pieces of the psalm that make its way into the Torah service itself. And what is that line? Adonai is giving strength to the people. Adonai is blessing the people with peace, right? And how do we do that? The Torah. right? And that's why it's connected to the Torah service, is the idea that one of the major ways that we can find strength as a people, as a community, not just now individually, but if we want to now move into a collective space and the power of what it means that a community can bring about change, what we have as Jews at the foundation of being able to make that change is through the Torah itself and what the Torah can offer us. So those are a few things from this, and I think I saw that there were a few hands up. So let's go first to Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hello. I would take a dissenting view, slightly so, in that these examples of God's actions and magnificence in the world do not, for the most part, create that personal relationship, that personal identification and speech and communion with God. That still small voice that God uses to speak to each of us is where we connect, whether it's through prayer or whether it's through meditation or whatever you choose when you do try to commune with God. Those major events are impersonal unless there's a relationship where you can feel that communication. Thinking about grand and grandiose events of God doesn't create that personal communication that prayer represents. So yes, it's a focus. Yes, you should pray. Yes, you should try to look at the world through the eyes of justice. But this has to be a personal relationship. That still small voice that you use when you communicate personally. That's the essence.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Yes, you're right. There are those moments where you are going to find a connection much more so through that still small voice and not in the grandiosity of the world. I think my counter to that, and it's not really a counter or a dissent, because I agree with you that those are really significant moments. I would just say I think these Psalms are both trying to humble us into the fact that we are small and we are not at the center of the world and something much bigger does exist. And yet also, if we only see ourselves as limited, small little creatures and that God is only this grandiose power that we can't touch, that's not going to allow us to really get where we need to in our own path of spiritual growth. And that we have to somehow, in God's awesomeness, be able to see our place in a relationship with God. And that if we can somehow understand those moments where we can feel some of that grandiosity in a positive way, not in a non-humble way, but when we can feel the power surging within us, whether it's passion, whether it's excitement, whatever it may be, can we somehow link some of that to God and find a connection not only in the still small voice, but I think our challenge in our spiritual journey is to be able to slowly expand the ways in which we can connect to something bigger than ourselves. And it's obviously a lifelong challenge, but thank you. I really appreciate your thoughts. Sukasa.
No, that was from before.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so then in that case, let's move on to, we have a few more Psalms to get through. Psalm 29, which we just read, is the one that comes right before Lachadodi, but then there are two more that come after Lachadodi that kind of round out Kabbalat Shabbat before it ends. So let's just look at those. We're going to be right on time. The first is Psalm 92, right? Mizmor Shir Leom HaShabbat. Mizmor Shir Leom HaShabbat Tov Lehodot LaAdonai Ulezamer Lishimcha Elyon Ulezamer Lishimcha Elyon. Okay? A song to the day of Shabbat. It is good to offer thanks to Adonai, gratitude, and to sing to your name most high, to tell tales of your covenantal love in the morning and your faithfulness in the nights. On a 10-string and on a lute, on meditative strumming of a lyre, for you have given me joy through your acts of the work of your hands I shall sing. How great are your works, Adonai! How very deep your thoughts! An ignorant man will not know, a fool will not understand this. When wicked people sprout up like grass, and all the doers of iniquity peep through the ground, they will be stamped out for eternity. But you are on high forever, Adonai. For behold, your foes, Adonai, for behold, your foes shall fall away. All the workers of iniquity shall be scattered. But you hold up my horn like a hoary ox. I luxuriate in scented oils. My eye can spot those who are watching me. My ear detects the evildoers rising up against me. A just person sprouts up like the palm, growing tall like a cedar in the Lebanon. Planted in the house of Adonai, they will sprout nobly in the courts of our God. They shall be fruitful even in old age. Green and luxuriant shall they be, branching out in tails of the uprightness of Adonai, my rock, in whom no imperfection can be found. Okay, so this, a psalm specifically dedicated to Shabbat, right? And here we have a little reference to gratitude. We have, again, an interesting thing that on Shabbat we have a direct reference to musical instruments, right? And that this is a song about the day of Shabbat, and it references the use of musical instruments to help make that an even more meaningful day. And then we have this idea, right? I've been thinking about what's been going on lately in our country, that wicked people sprout up like grass, and all the doers of iniquity peep through the ground, but they will be stamped out for eternity. And on the contrast, while the wicked people eventually are going to get their due, and they will be stamped out, on the same thing, there's another type of person that can sprout up. But this type of person sprouts up like a palm, right? That can last a very long time, that is strong, that grows tall like a cedar, that will be planted nobly in the courts and shall be fruitful even in old age, right? That's the goal. Can we continue to grow? That Shabbat is our opportunity for us to be thinking about, how can I continue to grow spiritually, intellectually, communally, right? What are all the ways, instead of focusing as it does towards the beginning about the negativity of those weeds that we know sprout up and we have seen sprout up around us, they're going to be taken care of. And we're going to help do that through a sense of justice, as we've been reiterating throughout the Psalms so far on Shabbat. But the other way to combat those weeds that keep sprouting up is to really focus on, how can we be the just person that can sprout up like a palm? Because if we can do that, if we can focus our energy about how we are growing in a just and meaningful and positive way, then we are going to be able to stay that way for a very, very long time. So those are just a few things that come out from this psalm, and then we'll just finish it up, and then we'll open it up to some questions before we conclude it. Then the last one of Kabbalat Shabbat, the last psalm, is Psalm 93. Okay, and that says, Adonai is sovereign, robed in nobility, robed is Adonai, girded with strength. Now the world is set firm, it will not be shaken. As your throne was set firm since the beginning of time, you have been forever. Though the rivers leap up, Adonai, the rivers leap up full-voiced. Though the rivers leap up in crashing cadence, more powerful than their sound, than the crash of all the mighty breakers of the sea below, is the might on high of Adonai. Your testimonies are very faithful. Holy beauty will curtain your house, Adonai, for long days, long, long days. So we end Kabbalat Shabbat with this idea of being robed in nobility. Right? We're finally about to we've finished, we're at the end of Kabbalat Shabbat, we're really entering into a Shabbat frame of mind. Now we literally are embraced by God. We are clothed in God in a way, girded with strength since the beginning of time, that no matter what, the leaping up of the rivers, whatever the craziness of the world around us, there is something that we can hold on to, and holy beauty will curtain your house, right? So there's both a power that's found here with God, and yet at the same time, we're supposed to start to feel cared for. And Shabbat is a way in which we can be cared for, that there is a destructive power that exists, as this part talks about the rivers leaping up, the full voice, right? There is a power and a somewhat destructive power that will always exist in the world, and yet in the midst of that, we can find a little place to feel secure and calm and to rebuild ourselves and to replenish ourselves. So those are the Psalms that we have. Those are the final ones that conclude Kabbalat Shabbat. There are, of course, other Psalms that we find during Shabbat, but I wanted, of course, today, and took the whole time for us to focus on those Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat so that we can know them, right? So 95 through 99, then we have 29, and then we have 92 and 93. And that really is the core of the whole Kabbalat Shabbat experience, except for Lachadodi. Everything else is really psalm-based, poetry-based. So any other thoughts or comments before we conclude? I see Jeff has his hand up, so go ahead, Jeff.
One of the crucial comments in the second last psalm, in the first paragraph, describes covenantal relationship. This is obviously with us as humans, as people, as his creators, creation. How would you describe that specific idea of covenantal relationship?
I would describe covenantal relationship as a special two-way relationship, right? The word in Hebrew is brit, right? We have Brit Milah, we have the brit, the covenant of Mount Sinai. These are relationships similar to when we put on a ring for someone we want to spend the rest of our life with. That is a brit covenant as well. I see it as covenantal love as the recognition both of our limitations and our struggles, and also an idea that there is a relationship at which we are in with either another person, or if we want to take it, a relationship with God, that is accepting of who we are, that we will hold each other accountable, that I have the ability to hold God accountable, just as Abraham questioned God when God was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and was able to question God. And just as Jacob wrestled with the angel and his name was changed and he became Yisrael, we can be in relationship with God or a spiritual force. And that is a key part of what it means to be in a covenant, and that our tradition is urging us to be in that relationship. And that I then have responsibilities that go beyond just the benefits to my own life. It's not just about what I can be successful at for myself or my family, that my responsibilities go into a world, into a space that is much bigger than what I will ever be able to complete, right? There's the famous line, you are not required to complete the task, but you're not allowed to just step out of it. You still have a responsibility to be in this. And so I believe that this covenantal loving relationship between me and God is one in which there are plenty of things that I receive from God. And anytime I go out into nature, or anytime I hug my children or kiss my wife, I feel the power that comes with a force that is much bigger than me. And then in return for all of that beauty, for all the wonder of the world around me, I have certain responsibilities to uphold as well. And that the Torah and our tradition gives me those responsibilities, lays them out very clearly for me. And I have to spend my life working on those to uphold my end of the deal. So that's how I see that covenantal relationship. Thank you for asking. Okay, with that, I want to thank all of you for joining me for part 2. We'll have part 3 next week. And I hope you have a wonderful Shabbat coming up. You have now the whole list of all the Psalms that you find in Kabbalat Shabbat. So I hope this Shabbat, starting tomorrow night, you can maybe look at one of these Psalms or all of these Psalms slightly differently in a new way. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. So thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.